out there among us.
A pseudo-sequel to a classic 1950s science fiction film seems either an odd premise for a television series in the 80s,
I wonder what's on TV tonight.
or the most obvious idea in the world.
You said you were gonna let me go!
I lied.
35 years after an alien invasion nearly destroys the world,
In 1953, we experienced what can only be described as a war of the worlds.
the aliens are back in War of the Worlds. No one would have believed in the last years of the 20th century that human affairs were being watched from the timeless worlds of space. And yet, across the gulf of space, minds immeasurably superior to ours, well, paramount, regarded first-run syndication with envious eyes. And slowly and surely, they drew their plans against us. Yeah, not that one. George Powell and Byron Haskin's 1953 film The War of the Worlds ended with a definite win for the human race and a big fat L for the aliens, who came to a strange planet and died because they had no resistance to Earth bacteria. Ill-prepared space exploration does seem to be a cornerstone of science fiction, but you know, heading to another planet without a spacesuit, sealed pressurized vessels, etc. seems like asking for trouble.
We've got to find them before they do.
The War of the Worlds film was a classic, but it wasn't something that instantly lent itself to a sequel. Crazy, I know. Otherwise you'd have films like The 11 Commandments, or Battlefield 9, or 13 Angry Men. Paramount, who'd had the film rights to War of the Worlds and had almost made a series in the late 70s, felt they could do something with the property based on their film.
My hunch is that we're dealing with something entirely new here.
In the late 80s, H.G. Wells' work was in public domain in some countries such as Canada and Australia, but wouldn't enter public domain in the US and Europe until 2017. In 1988, Paramount decided to make a syndicated War of the Worlds series in Canada. Not necessarily due to copyright, but in the late 80s, a lot of American genre television series headed north to Canada, to either Vancouver, or in the case of War of the Worlds, Toronto. Canada offered a lot to producers, a healthy supply of denim, proximity to Tim Hortons, and a very favourable exchange rate.
Depending on the details, of course. Yes, I'd be very interested.
In the mid-80s, producer Greg Strangis had been in talks with Paramount as a potential producer of their upcoming Star Trek revival on television, though his involvement may have been as a ploy by the studio to cajole Star Trek's creator Gene Roddenberry into taking on the role. In the end, Paramount hired Strangis to put together another syndicated series, this time based on their 1953 movie War of the Worlds. To say the producer's relationship with the studio over the series was turbulent is a bit of an understatement. The studio wanted a show for beer drinkers because wine drinkers were apparently too cerebral. Though after a few bottles of either, is there really that much difference? It's also odd that almost nobody seems to drink beer in the first season. Greg Strangis and his father Sam oversaw most of the first season before exiting. There would be a pretty major retooling of the show for what would become its second and final season, and unusually for this type of show, cancelled in its second year, does actually resolve the story in the final episode, though we'll get to that later.
What the hell are they up to?
It's bad enough when you can see them. It's worse when you can't.
War of the Worlds mixed action with horror, and in some ways was a teaser of The X-Files, with the paranoid conspiratorial science fiction of the 90s. Some first-run syndicated television series in the late 80s really did push the envelope in terms of violence and gore, so if you are squeamish, be aware in reviewing this show, there were a lot of bloody killings, eye gougings, and shots of aliens melting. This is a show that's in part The Invaders, part Invasion of the Body Snatchers, part Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons, with a tiny infinitesimal sliver of War of the Worlds. If you want to see alien war machines laying waste to cities, this is not that show, not with the budget this series had. Also, despite the movie's opening narration talking about the dying inhabitants of Mars looking earthward, this series would quietly change the alien invaders' planet of origin twice.
Those who can't remember the invasion can't remember it because it was just too frightening for them to deal with.
35 years after the attempted invasion by aliens as depicted in the movie, hardly anybody seems to remember that Earth was actually nearly destroyed by creatures from another world. It turns out the bodies of dead aliens are in fact merely dormant and awakened after some terrorists take over a storage facility and inadvertently become hosts for the alien leaders. Their motto seems to be, if at first you don't succeed in invading Earth, try again.
Why do they have to mutilate people?
Because it's war, Suzanne.
I mean, that is commendable persistence in the face of customer resistance, like a Rolling Stones concert where they only perform new material.
It has to be the aliens, don't you see? The only common denominator of the brains that were left behind are those brain diseases.
The aliens can take over any human body, but that body will break down over time, given each body only a usefulness of a short period. It's not like they get a touch of arthritis or creaking joints in middle age, but within a very short space of time, their bodies will turn into a mushy puddle. Mind where you step. The aliens on Earth are from a dying planet of Mortax. Perhaps the producers were being audited that week.
To life immortal.
And they have a limited time to defeat humanity before millions of alien colonists arrive.
Yes, the chances of anything coming from Mortax are 1,000,000 to 1, he said.
The aliens are ruled by a council of 3, the Advocacy, who oversee the plans of their minions, who are clearly thick as 2 planks, but planks that are made up of 3 planks stuck together. So all up, that's 4, 5. Thick as the equivalent of 6 planks.
I don't know whether or not these guys are aliens, Doctor. But they are definitely weird.
The aliens are clearly working on a very limited budget. Combating the alien menace is a top-secret organization, the Blackwood Project, set up by the US government with a small team to study and prepare a defense against the alien menace. Dr. Harrison Blackwood is a quirky scientist who uses a tuning fork to help him think, sleeps odd hours, and whose adoptive parents are the heroes of the original film. He was continuing his father's work when he discovers, holy shit, the aliens are back and organizing a comeback. Like Elvis, but without the entertaining TV special. Harrison wants to defeat the aliens, but first he wants to learn about them so that he can destroy them better. Later on, the character will shift his stance as part of a major shakeup of the series after the first season, but more on that later. Jared Martin was no stranger to science fiction and genre shows, having done guest shots on many of them, and at one time had starred in the short-lived 1970s series Fantastic Journey.
There won't be any second chance.
Suzanne McCullough is a microbiologist, but just to clarify, she's normal-sized, it's the biology that's micro.
That's assuming that there's no chemical change when an alien takes over a human body.
She's a single mother to Debbie and initially annoyed by Blackwood's odd habits and how he would occasionally take his staff for granted.
Just because I don't have an answer doesn't mean there isn't a logical explanation for your paranoia.
Lynda Mason Green mainly appeared in productions made in her native Canada.
We will kill the aliens.
Lieutenant Colonel Paul Ironhorse was a Native American Army officer whose job it was to deal with the combat aspects of the Blackwood Project. He's stiff and by the book, the antithesis of Blackwood.
What the hell am I doing dressed like this? I feel like a jerk.
They would clash on policies, but would have respect for each other's abilities.
I don't believe in ghosts, and I sure as hell don't believe in aliens from another planet.
Richard Chaves' character seems uncomfortable with admitting aliens are a thing in early episodes, but grows into the part of a soldier who's not just a gung-ho killing machine, typified by an incident where he accidentally kills a civilian. Having said that, he's a very good killing machine. If you needed somebody to deal with a vermin infestation, then I'm sure Ironhorse could take a look.
Hey, it's no problem.
But if it's aliens from Mortax you need dealing with, he's your guy. Chaves, of course, is well known to fans of Predator and other shows.
Our project is too important to jeopardize.
Notice he said our project and not our lives. Gertrude, to the office.
Norton Drake is a wheelchair-bound tech genius who spends most of his time at Blackwood HQ hacking info from military computers, or looking things up on Microsoft Encarta and tracking alien signals. Philip Akin starts the show with a vaguely Jamaican accent which disappears fairly swiftly. Norton even manages a few action scenes, as he's a dab hand with a staff.
I just wish the original material was better.
Akin and Chaves would both be written out of the series when the show was reformatted for its second season, though both actors would have long careers popping up here and there.
Remember our friends, Colonel Paul Ironhorse and Norton Drake.
The aliens would try to move their takeover forward, either by turning kitchen appliances into high-tech gadgets,
Next right turn.
taking over people in the right place, or with just lots of gory murders. A few times they try to recover weapons from previous invasions, which by far turns out to be the coolest part of the series. Unfortunately, we would not see the alien technology very often. The show War of the Worlds doesn't just treat the 1950s movie as canon, but also Orson Welles' 1938 radio dramatization, which here is treated as an advanced alien scouting party. The ruling aliens, the advocacy, end up in these latex suits which look less like invaders from Mars and more like folks cleaning up spills caused by overturned septic tanks. The aliens in human form would often speak in their own language, comically so, and when coupled with some old-fashioned sound effects used in the action scenes, can make parts of the show feel like a dub of a 1970s Soviet-era science fiction movie.
I'm too old for this stuff.
Harrison occasionally meets up with Sylvia Van Buren, who was a lead character in the 1950s movie, still played by Anne Robinson. The character had had a hard time post-invasion and had not been completely in control of herself.
I hate to interrupt this cozy conversation, but could someone please call me an ambulance?
You're an ambulance.
The aliens would try various things in order to accomplish their mission. A horny drug, finding ways to increase humanity's aggression, a very big bomb, sticking a war machine on the back of a hearse, or even taking people over through hypnotic rock music. And here it's a hypnotic rock version of the show's theme tune, the composer of which in the episode is played by the show's real composer for the first season, Billy Thorpe, an Australian rock star of the 60s and 70s.
The beginning of the end of human life on this planet.
Exactly, comrade. A most comforting thought.
To life immortal.
There's a slow build-up of evidence about the aliens' plots and motives, conveniently summarized in an episode toward the end of the season, which starts off as a clip show before turning into a big battle. When the show wasn't creeping you out, it could have some exciting and well-staged action sequences.
I saw a hell of a lot of action during that war, and for the life of me, I can't seem to remember a detail.
There were a few guest characters of note. Suzanne's uncle, General Wilson, was nominally overseeing the Blackwood project. Later on, he's more often mentioned rather than seen.
Human secrets are pathetically protected by those who make them, Harry. A few bucks here, a phone tap there, and anything you want to know is yours.
There was also the alien renegade Quinn, who gives up some information about the aliens. That is, when he's not trying to take over the Earth for himself.
If those from Mortex conquer this planet, both our peoples will suffer and die.
There's also the synthetic alien assassin, but from a different group of aliens who want to destroy the Mortexans, while they have their own agenda. Also worth noting, the line between assassination and funk fusion dance-off is a very thin one. The highlights of early episodes are the glimpses of the alien vehicles as used in the movies, but these expensive effects slowly disappear from the show, and we end up with a series where aliens gouge out people's eyes. The first season often ended on a dour note, sometimes effectively,
but in my heart I know the aliens have Karen McKinney.
Sometimes rather cheesily, thanks to some very late 80s syndicated production values.
Frankly, Suzanne, I don't give a damn.
It was usually interesting, but the show wasn't an unqualified hit in first-run syndication, so while it was renewed, it would be retooled fairly drastically. The second series would now be overseen by Frank Mancuso Jr., who'd been a producer on films throughout the 80s and had been overseeing Paramount's other syndicated series, Friday the 13th. His vision for the series was to change it drastically, yet have it sort of the same, but different, but not too different, but at the same time barely recognizable, like a dorm room after a vape pen battery explodes. Season 2 rang in the changes, but where to start?
There's rioting breaking out throughout the city. Fires continue to burn everywhere. Troops are shooting people.
Somewhere along the line there was some sort of partial societal collapse that's never really fully articulated. The show was now set in the near future, referred to as almost tomorrow. The Mortaxans have just disappeared, replaced by a different and more humanoid race of aliens, the Mothran, from Mothrai.
It's the chances of anything coming from Mothrai.
The show doesn't really feel the need to explain the change in all that much detail. It's not important why I have a flamethrower, but now that I'm here, do you want me to deal with those wasps or not? The changes are dealt with in the first episode of Season 2, where by the end, Drake and Iron Horse are both killed off, and the Blackwood HQ destroyed.
They're aliens.
Harrison and Suzanne would continue, now unaffiliated with the military, but still fighting the aliens on their own dime. They're now joined by ex-soldier John Kincaid, played by future Highlander the series star Adrian Paul.
Okay, so that's legit.
Come on, let's face it, we don't know who's who anymore.
Kincaid by far seems to have been the most popular character with the producers. Harrison and Suzanne, by comparison, get far fewer episodes spotlighting them compared to the first season. Suzanne's daughter Debbie would now be a bigger character. Rachel Blanchard would become one of those actors that would appear everywhere, even starring in a 90s TV version of Clueless.
It's really gross.
The horror of the first season was lessened with less eye gouging, which is either a plus or a minus depending on your tolerance for eye gouging. Personally, I'm not a fan because it really does make owning a VR headset less appealing.
I hear the sound of doors being slammed.
Yeah, they're cutting us loose. We're on our own.
Just like the Colonel said.
The four main characters now live in a secret underground lair, while on the surface, these new aliens have different ways of working. They can clone humans, and their bodies do not disintegrate, so the main aliens can walk among us, passing for human. Having actors to react to rather than cheesy spacesuits with cartoonish voiceovers does make things work a little better, but the stories try a lot harder to be edgy, yet are less interesting. Blackwood, now sporting a beard, is less of a quirky scientist, and now some guy in a dystopian future who has a beard, while Suzanne tries to raise her daughter in a bunker. There are some early attempts at visualizing internet communications, and some attempts to inject character, which seems to be mainly introducing an associate of Kincaid so that we can kill them off. The other main character trait, trying to work out what sort of accent Adrian Paul is going for, other than all of them.
Sometimes when you start something, it's hard to give it up. She'll work it out on her own.
I don't know, but I'll handle it. Too late for that now. Tell me what's happening.
I have to get back to the shelter before he does.
We're shown a mix of a society having broken down, but of course most people are unaware of the aliens. There is high society living it up as usual, which contrasts with the seedy clubs and bars we often see our crew skulking about in.
Sorry I asked.
Early on this season, there's a relatively token attempt to tie in with events already established, though the series will soon forge its own path in terms of characters and stories. Probably the best second season episode, or at least the one I found the most interesting, involved Blackwood and Kincaid travelling back in time to 1953.
Now, if you'll excuse me.
Harrison falls for an alien, Debbie falls for an alien. Everyone gets a little romance here and there. The alien plans take darker turns when the aliens are fighting their own war of attrition. They're trying to breed new subjects and conduct various experiments on humans. There's an episode where Debbie is forced into a virtual reality combat arena. Or is she playing Defender? One story is about an Omen-style creepy kid. There's a noticeable increase in the quality of the show's lighting and cinematography. On the other hand, the new aliens do come across as college students LARPing as cut-price Romulans in the Star Trek fan film. One failing of both seasons is that while the audience could see the aliens plotting and Blackwood and company separately, there wasn't enough of an overlap whereby they interacted with each other or were even aware of each other. This changes over time in season 2 with Suzanne's daughter Debbie befriending a young alien, and in the last few episodes, all of a sudden everybody finally knows everyone's name, and we're not talking about Cheers. The penultimate episode saw Blackwood, Suzanne and Kincaid framed by the aliens for murder and presumed dead, while after things wrap up in the final episode, they're all free to resume their lives. Apart from the fact they're officially dead, and if they weren't dead, they are still wanted for armed robbery and murder. The actual final episode sees flashbacks to the aliens' homeworld that seems to overwrite much of the established lore of the series. But the important takeaway is that it's all one evil alien that's been the problem, and so everybody teams up to defeat him, and that's it, it's over. So here's a series that's not a particularly light show, and can be quite visceral and exciting. Even though the horror aspect is toned down slightly in the second year, what action there is usually quite well staged. The acting of the day players seems to have improved a lot in the second year, with a mix of Canadian actors, including kids from Degrassi shows or folks familiar from other series like Battlestar Galactica, as well as a number of familiar guest stars here and there. Mostly there, but sometimes here or there.
We have much more important things to discuss.
This was a show that I discovered back in the day when first season episodes were released as video rentals. I liked it well enough back then, but I wasn't able to see the second series. Going back and watching the whole thing now, it's clear the initial momentum the series had is soon lost when it becomes a generic late 80s sci-fi horror series. The second season retooling managed to improve in terms of production value, but also became so far removed from the original premise that any link to the 1953 movie is spurious at best.
Hey, why don't you shut up, all right? Why don't you shut up? What'd you say?
He said, shut up.
I don't know about other viewers, but it really wasn't working for me in the second season. Try-hard, uber-dark sci-fi stories, some of which barely feature the main characters, and do feel a bit like cast-off Twilight Zone scripts. Is it watchable? Probably the easiest way to see the show is the DVD release, which is not a particularly good DVD release, which for some reason removed the tag at the end of each episode of the alien hand wrapping itself around the Earth. If you really like alien invasion stories or want to see a prototype X-Files or whatever, then sure, you might get a kick out of this one. The first season has a lot of potential. The second season was a pure slog to get through, like training for a marathon on a snow day.
My God, he's a clone.
There would be other attempts at tackling War of the Worlds, from indie films to Steven Spielberg's 2005 update starring Tom Cruise. And again, there was a pretty awful BBC adaptation and another co-production between Fox and Studio Canal. Now that it's public domain everywhere, look out for my updated version of War of the Worlds. That is a faithful adaptation of the book. Unfortunately, I didn't have a copy of War of the Worlds to work from, so instead I used the book Flowers in the Attic.
There's more to life than survival.
Not in my book.
Sometimes, Kincaid, I don't think you got enough pages in your book.
War of the World is an odd late 80s blend of science fiction, action and horror. Apart from the one episode that's got alien fighters trying to put together a surprise party for a teenager. Huh? The first season had better stories and much more interesting main characters, but looks really cheap. There's a lot of visceral horror, which is a nice name for bloody gore. The second season looks far better, but doesn't have much spark in the storytelling. And as for the characters, who cares?
I have to kill you, Debbie. I know that.
This was a show that had potential, but didn't quite find a groove, like the time I tried to DJ at a wedding using a cassette deck. But at the very least, unlike so many other similar shows, it actually does wrap up a storyline by the end of its run. A cancelled show that doesn't leave you hanging was about as rare as a tooth fairy visit to a chicken coop. So, if you're in the mood for some Warren of the Worlden, go for it. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
Now, don't give up. Not when you're so damn close.
Don't let him win, man.